Hey everyone, Noir here. Let's get into today's Reddit story. Let me tell you what happened. My girlfriend's best guy friend stood in my own living room, looked me in the eye, and said she would be better off without me. I didn't let it slide. I called him out right there in front of everyone. Instead of taking my side, my girlfriend looked at me and said, "Apologize to him or we're finished." I smiled, stayed calm, and answered, "Then I guess we're finished, sweetheart." Neither of them had the slightest idea how that night was about to end. My name is Ethan. I am 33 years old and I work as a plumber in Nashville. Most mornings start before sunrise because customers want their plumbing problems fixed as early as possible. If I am lucky, I make it home by late afternoon. On busier days, I am still out repairing burst pipes or dealing with emergency calls well into the evening, sometimes not getting home until 9 at night. A few years ago, after putting in countless long days, weekend jobs, and extra service calls, I finally saved enough money to buy a modest 2-story townhouse on the east side of Nashville. It is nothing extravagant, but every inch of that place was earned through my own hard work, and I have always taken pride in that. My girlfriend Sophie was 29 years old and worked as a florist at a small boutique flower shop downtown. We had been together for a little over 2 years when all of this happened. About 8 months before everything fell apart, she moved into my townhouse. The rent at her old apartment had gone up, and the building was being renovated, so living together seemed like the obvious next step. Our arrangement was simple. I paid the mortgage, covered the utility bills, and handled anything related to maintaining the house. Sophie took care of the grocery shopping along with the smaller expenses we shared. Most evenings we ate dinner together unless I got stuck across town finishing an emergency plumbing job. Sophie also had a longtime best friend named Ryan. She told me they met in college and stayed close after graduation. That never bothered me. I have always believed that adults can have close friendships with people of the opposite sex, and I was never interested in competing with someone who had been part of her life long before I came along. The problem was that Ryan seemed to be around much more than I expected. Sometimes Sophie invited him over for dinner. Other times, he would text her and stop by later that evening without much notice. From the very beginning, he acted like my townhouse was simply another place for him to hang out instead of someone else's home. He would kick off his shoes and leave them on my couch. He opened my refrigerator and helped himself to whatever food or drinks he wanted without asking. On top of that, he constantly offered loud opinions about situations that had absolutely nothing to do with him, acting like everyone should care what he thought. At first, I kept things civil. Ryan was a guest in my house, and I have never been the kind of guy who starts arguments over every little thing. Still, there was always something about him that bothered me. It was hard to explain, but the disrespect was always there, just beneath the surface. He had this habit of making little comments whenever he got the chance. Sometimes he would tell Sophie she deserved someone with a more exciting life. Other times, he would joke about my job, acting like being a plumber had to be the most boring career in the world. None of those comments were bad enough on their own to start a huge fight, but they never stopped. It was just one little jab after another. Whenever he said something, Sophie would laugh it off and tell me that Ryan was just sarcastic. According to her, that was simply his personality, and I should not take him so seriously. After hearing that excuse enough times, I stopped expecting anything different. Then, about 3 weeks before everything fell apart, we invited a few friends over for dinner at my townhouse. It was nothing fancy. We ordered takeout, opened a couple of bottles of wine, and spent the evening talking. And yes, Ryan was there too. About an hour into the night, the conversation turned to relationships, marriage, and what everyone wanted their future to look like. Out of nowhere, Ryan looked at Sophie, then looked at me, and casually said she would be better off without me. The whole room went silent. It was that awkward kind of silence where everyone knows somebody just crossed the line, but nobody wants to be the first person to react. For a few seconds, nobody said a word. One of Sophie's friends stared down into her wine glass. Another guy cleared his throat and started looking at his phone like he suddenly had something important to check. Everyone at that table knew Ryan's comment was out of line. The only person acting like nothing happened was Ryan. He leaned back in his chair, looking completely relaxed, like he had just made a normal observation. Sophie let out a short laugh, but it sounded nervous more than anything else. I slowly set my drink on the table and looked right at him. Can you repeat that? I asked. He shrugged and gave me that smug little smile people use when they suddenly want to pretend they were joking after saying something insulting. Relax, he said. It is just my opinion. Then he kept going. He said Sophie was smart, outgoing, and full of energy, while I spent my days crawling under sinks, fixing pipes, and unclogging toilets. He said it like he was simply pointing out the obvious instead of insulting me in front of everyone sitting in my house. By then, the room was completely quiet. I looked him straight in the eye and asked one simple question. What made you think it was okay to come into my house and disrespect me under my own roof? He rolled his eyes at me and said I was being way too sensitive. Then he said the one thing that made everything crystal clear. He looked at Sophie and said that if she had listened to him sooner, she probably would have found someone better by now. That was the moment I got to my feet. I did not raise my voice. I did not slam my hands on the table or make a scene. I simply stood up, looked him in the eye for a second, and spoke as calmly as I could. I reminded him that he was a guest in my house, and I told him he was done talking to me like that. Then I made it simple. If you've got a problem with me, keep it to yourself, I said. Otherwise, you can leave. Ryan actually laughed. He leaned forward with that same smug look on his face and said I had no right to tell him what he could or could not say around Sophie. Before I could answer, Sophie stood up too. The problem was, she was not upset with Ryan. She was upset with me. I had never heard her talk to me in that tone before. Her voice turned cold and sharp as she looked right at me. She said I was embarrassing her by turning an obvious joke into a big scene. Then she told me I needed to apologize to Ryan so everyone could calm down and get back to enjoying the evening. By then, every single person at the table was watching us. I just stood there staring at Sophie because, honestly, I thought I had heard her wrong. So, what did you just say? I asked. She folded her arms across her chest and repeated herself. This time she said it even louder. You need to apologize to Ryan for overreacting. Then she hit me with one last sentence. And if you won't apologize, she said, then we're done. The second she said that, everything became incredibly clear. There was nothing left to argue about. I did not yell at Sophie. I did not fire another insult back at Ryan. I just looked around the table for a few seconds and realized the night was already over, whether anyone else wanted to admit it or not. So I made a decision. I calmly told everyone that dinner was over and that it was time to head home. For a moment, nobody even moved. One of Sophie's friends looked at me and asked, Wait, are you serious? I nodded. Yes, I said as calmly as ever. I'm not going to keep hosting people in my own house after being told I should apologize for getting insulted in my own living room. That was enough. The silence finally broke. Chairs scraped across the floor as people started getting up. Someone reached for a jacket. Another person quietly said the night had gotten way too uncomfortable. Ryan, though, stayed right where he was. He leaned back in his chair again with that same smug little grin, like he thought I was putting on some kind of show. So you're really throwing everybody out over one comment? He asked. I looked at him and shook my head. No, I said. Dinner is over. Then I looked him straight in the eye. And you should probably be the first one to leave. That finally got him out of his chair. As he walked toward the door, he muttered something under his breath about me having anger issues. I did not even acknowledge it. Instead, I walked over and opened the front door. Within a couple of minutes, everyone was gathering their things, giving quick, uncomfortable goodbyes, and making their way outside. The whole house emptied faster than I expected. Ryan ended up being the last person to step onto the porch. Right before he walked away, he turned back toward me, slowly shook his head, and looked at me like I was the one who had done something wrong. Then he said, Sophie deserves someone better than a man who acted the way I did. I never answered him. I simply closed the front door. The second it shut, the house went completely quiet. When I turned around, Sophie was still standing beside the dining table with her arms folded across her chest. She looked absolutely furious. She was not embarrassed. She was not uncomfortable. She was furious. The first thing out of her mouth was that I had just humiliated her in front of all of her friends. Then she looked at me and asked what the hell I thought I was doing. I answered her without hesitation. I am asking people who disrespect me to leave my house. She let out a sarcastic laugh and shook her head. According to her, Ryan had not disrespected me at all. He had only told the truth. The second she said that, something clicked in my head. Up until then, I thought the problem was Ryan. But standing there, listening to Sophie defend him, I realized he was never the real issue. She was. She stayed by the dining table, looking at me like she expected another argument. It seemed like she was waiting for me to defend myself or keep going back and forth with her. I had no interest in doing that anymore. The way she calmly said Ryan was just telling the truth made everything perfectly clear. I looked at her for a few seconds, nodded once, and simply said, "All right." She frowned, obviously confused by my reaction. Without saying another word, I walked right past her and headed upstairs. For a minute, she stayed downstairs. I could hear her moving around the kitchen, probably expecting me to cool off and come back so we could keep arguing. Instead, I walked straight into the bedroom and opened the closet. By then, nearly half of it was filled with her things. Her dresses were hanging beside my clothes. Jackets filled one side, and her shoes were lined up neatly along the bottom shelf. I grabbed the first empty laundry basket I could find and started packing. There was no anger behind it. I was not throwing her belongings around or trying to damage anything. I folded every piece of clothing before putting it into the basket. Her shoes went on top, nice and carefully. A couple of minutes later, I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. Sophie stopped in the bedroom doorway and just stared at me for a second. Finally, she asked, "What are you doing?" I looked at her and said, "I'm packing your things." At first, she laughed. She honestly thought I was just trying to scare her or make a point. But after watching me fold another shirt and put it into the laundry basket, she realized I was completely serious. Her whole attitude changed. She told me I was being dramatic and needed to calm down. I never stopped packing. As I folded another stack of clothes, I reminded her that she had already given me two choices downstairs. Either I apologized to Ryan or our relationship was over. She opened her mouth like she was about to argue, but nothing came out for a second. Then she quickly said that was not what she meant. I shook my head. "No," I said. "That is exactly what you meant. You said it loud and clear in front of 6 other people." She walked farther into the bedroom and looked at me in disbelief. "So you're really ending a 2-year relationship over one stupid argument at dinner?" she asked. I looked up at her. "No," I replied. "I'm ending it because you expected me to apologize to a guy who insulted me in my own house, and then you stood there and acted like he was right." The second I said that, she got angry all over again. She insisted Ryan was only looking out for her. According to her, people outside a relationship sometimes see problems more clearly than the people who are actually in it. I folded another pile of her clothes, placed them neatly into the basket, and looked her in the eye. "If Ryan is so concerned about your life," I said, "then maybe you should go stay with him." That was the moment she realized I was not bluffing. For several seconds, she just stared at the laundry basket in my hands. I could actually see it sink in. She finally understood I was not trying to make a point, and I was not threatening her just to win the argument. I meant it. The anger disappeared from her face, and it was replaced with shock. "Wait, are you seriously throwing me out?" she asked. I reminded her that the townhouse belonged to me. Then I reminded her that she had already said the relationship was over if I refused to apologize. She immediately tried to backtrack. "That isn't what I meant," she said. I nodded. "Maybe not," I answered. "But those are the words you chose." She started pacing back and forth across the bedroom, trying to figure out how everything had turned against her so fast. Then she said something I honestly did not expect. She looked at me and said I was letting my ego destroy our relationship. I quietly folded another stack of her clothes, placed it in the laundry basket, and shook my head. "No," I told her. "That isn't what's happening. What happened is that you chose Ryan over showing me basic respect." She immediately disagreed. According to her, Ryan had done absolutely nothing wrong. She insisted he was only being honest, and she said I should have handled the situation like an adult instead of throwing everyone out of the house. That was the first time since I started packing that I actually stopped. I turned and looked right at her. Then I asked her one simple question. "If one of my friends came into our house and told you that you'd be better off without me, would you laugh it off?" She never answered. Instead, she accused me of twisting everything around. That was all I needed to hear. I turned back to the closet and kept packing. About 10 minutes later, I had filled 2 laundry baskets and a small suitcase with almost everything she used every day. Her clothes were packed neatly. Her shoes were inside. I even grabbed her makeup bag from the bathroom and added it with the rest of her things. The whole time, she followed me around the house, still trying to argue. She kept saying I was overreacting and that real couples work through disagreements instead of ending relationships over one bad night. I carried everything downstairs and set the baskets beside the front door. Then I rolled her suitcase over and placed it next to them. After that, I opened the front door. The evening was quiet. The streetlights were already on, and the neighborhood had settled down for the night. When I turned back toward her, she looked completely stunned. "So, where am I supposed to go?" she asked. I shrugged. "Ryan seemed pretty confident about what's best for you," I said. "Maybe you should start there." She didn't move. She stood in the middle of the living room staring at the open door, then at the bags on the floor, and then back at me. I could tell she wanted to argue again. But something had changed. The confidence she had during dinner was completely gone. Now she looked unsure of herself. She looked at me and quietly asked, "Are you really making me leave in the middle of the night?" I glanced at the clock. "It is only a little after 9, I said. "Nashville isn't exactly closed for the night." Then I reminded her that she had plenty of places she could go. She had friends, she had co-workers, and of course, she had Ryan. The moment I said his name, her expression changed. She looked at me and said I was being petty for bringing Ryan into the conversation again. I shrugged. "I didn't bring him into this," I said. "He already inserted himself into our relationship earlier tonight." She just stood there for a few seconds, staring at me like she was waiting for me to change my mind. I didn't. When she realized that, she slowly walked over to the front door and looked down at the bags. She picked up one of the laundry baskets, then reached for the handle of her suitcase. Right before she walked outside, she turned back toward me. Most of the anger was gone from her voice now. She sounded more defensive than anything else. She told me I was going to regret this once I had time to calm down. According to her, I was throwing away everything we had built over the past 2 years because of one stupid comment. I leaned against the wall beside the doorway and quietly shook my head. "No," I said. "This relationship ended the moment you told me to apologize to someone who insulted me in my own house." She looked at me for another few seconds, almost like she expected me to show some emotion or tell her to stay. I didn't. I had already made up my mind while I was upstairs packing her things. There was nothing left to discuss. A few seconds later, she stepped out onto the porch. She carried one laundry basket down to the sidewalk, came back for the second one, and then pulled the suitcase behind her as she walked down the short path toward the street. She never turned around. About 30 seconds later, I saw headlights coming down the block. A car pulled over beside her. I stood in the doorway and watched her load her bags into the back seat before getting in herself. Then the car drove away. As soon as it disappeared, the neighborhood was quiet again. I closed the front door, locked it, and stood there for a moment. The house felt different. Not sad. Just quiet. A kind of quiet I had not experienced in a long time. The dinner plates were still sitting on the table, and a couple of half-empty glasses were next to the sink. Everything had happened so fast that nobody even thought about cleaning up. I spent the next few minutes turning off lights, picking up a few things our guests had left behind, and putting the house back in order. When I was done, I sat down on the couch. About 5 minutes later, my phone started vibrating. It was Sophie. I watched the call come through and let it ring. Eventually, it stopped. A few seconds later, it started ringing again. I ignored that call, too. When she called a third time, I still didn't answer. Instead, I unlocked my phone and checked the messages she had sent. The first one was short. She told me to stop being ridiculous, answer the phone, and talk things through like adults. The second message said she was staying at a friend's place for the night and expected us to work everything out in the morning. The third message was a lot longer. She said I had completely overreacted because I was embarrassed in front of everyone. According to her, Ryan had only said what plenty of other people were probably already thinking. I read that message twice, not because it hurt, because it told me everything I needed to know. There wasn't a single apology anywhere in it. She never admitted Ryan had crossed the line. She never acknowledged that he had insulted me in my own house. Instead, the entire message was another explanation of why I was supposedly the one who handled everything wrong. That made my next decision easy. I opened her contact and blocked her number. Then I went through my social media accounts and removed her there too. The whole thing took less than 30 seconds. I wasn't doing it out of anger. Honestly, it felt more like closing a door that had already been halfway shut for a long time. Once I finished, I set my phone back on the table and went back to cleaning the kitchen. About an hour later, my phone buzzed again. It was a text from an unknown number. The message was short. "Ethan, we need to talk." There was no greeting, no explanation, just those 4 words. I didn't have to wonder who sent it. I already knew who it was. There was only one person who would start texting me from a random number right after I blocked Sophie. Ryan. I set my phone back on the kitchen counter and finished rinsing a couple of plates before I looked at it again. By then, 2 more messages had come in. The first one said that throwing Sophie out of the house like that was messed up. The next one told me I needed to call him so we could fix the situation. I actually laughed when I read that. Fix the situation? The same guy who came into my house, insulted me in front of everyone, and helped cause this whole mess now wanted to be the one to solve it. I sent him one short reply. There is nothing to fix. About 10 seconds later, my phone started ringing. Ethane number. I declined the call. Almost immediately, another text came through. He wanted to know what my problem was. He said I needed to quit acting like a child. Then he told me Sophie was really upset and that I should think carefully about what I was doing. I read the message once, locked my phone, and put it back down. But Ryan wasn't finished. A few minutes later, another message popped up. This time he said that if I had any respect for Sophie at all, I would stop hiding behind blocked numbers and talk to him like a man. I ignored that one too. After a few more minutes, I went back to cleaning the kitchen. Then my phone rang again. This time it was a different number. I answered it. The second I heard her voice, I knew it was Sophie. She sounded nothing like she had during dinner. The confidence and attitude were completely gone. The second she started talking, I could hear the difference. Her voice was shaky, rushed, and full of panic. The first thing she told me was that Ryan had kicked her out of his apartment. Apparently, after leaving my place, she went straight to his apartment expecting him to let her stay for the night. That wasn't what happened. She said they ended up arguing instead. According to Sophie, Ryan told her the whole situation was her problem now. He didn't want any drama in his apartment, and after a few minutes he told her she had to leave. Now she was standing outside with her bags and nowhere to go. That's when her whole tone changed. She started begging. She apologized for everything that had happened at dinner. She admitted she should have stood up for me instead of defending Ryan. Over and over, she kept saying she had made a mistake. Then she asked if she could come back to the house so we could sit down and talk. By the end of the call, she was practically pleading with me to forgive her. I didn't say anything for a while. I just let her keep talking. Her words were coming out fast now, and she sounded desperate. It was hard to believe this was the same woman who had confidently demanded that I apologize to Ryan just a few hours earlier. She kept repeating that she had been wrong. She said she never should have taken Ryan's side. She admitted she didn't realize how serious everything was until he threw her out of his apartment. Then she asked me one more time if she could come back so we could work things out. I leaned against the kitchen counter and waited until she had finished. When she finally stopped talking, I answered as calmly as I had all night. I told her I wasn't angry anymore. And that was the truth. The anger was gone. But I also told her that we were already past the point where an apology could fix what had happened. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, she spoke again. In a quiet voice, she asked if I was really refusing to let her come back. Yes, I said, but it isn't because we had one argument. It is because you showed me exactly where I stood the moment Ryan disrespected me. I paused for a second before continuing. He insulted me in my own house in front of everyone, and you chose to stand with him instead of me. She immediately tried to cut me off. She started apologizing all over again, talking faster than before. But I let her finish. When she was done, I gave her a simple suggestion. I reminded her that her parents lived only about 30 minutes outside of Nashville. I also mentioned that her older sister had an apartment across town. Either one of those places made a lot more sense than coming back to my house. She didn't say anything for a few seconds. Then she quietly asked if I was really ending our entire relationship over this. I shook my head, even though she couldn't see it. "No," I told her. "You ended it earlier tonight when you gave me that ultimatum." Another long silence followed. When she finally spoke again, she was begging. She apologized once more and asked me to give her another chance. By then, I knew the conversation wasn't going anywhere. Nothing she said was going to change what had already happened. So I told her I genuinely hoped she found somewhere safe to stay that night. Then I ended the call. After that, I blocked that number too. It was the third number I had blocked before the night was over. Once I finished, my phone finally stopped ringing. No more calls, no more messages, just silence. No more people trying to tell me that what I saw happen in my own living room wasn't what actually happened. I finished cleaning the kitchen and put the last glass into the dishwasher. When I looked over at the dining table, it was empty again. It was strange. Just a couple of hours earlier, that same table had 6 people sitting around it, eating takeout, drinking wine, and talking about whatever came to mind. Now the whole house was quiet. Honestly, it didn't feel bad. It just felt peaceful. I sat down on the couch and replayed the entire night in my head from the beginning. The more I thought about it, the more I realized something. The biggest problem wasn't actually what Ryan said. People say stupid things all the time. What really mattered was what Sophie did right after he said it. She never told him to stop. She never said he had crossed the line. She never stood up for me. Instead, she looked me in the eye and demanded that I apologize to the man who had just insulted me in my own house. That was the moment I realized exactly where I stood in our relationship. After that, everything else was just taking care of business, asking everyone to leave, packing up her things, watching her walk out the front door, blocking the phone numbers. None of it came from anger. By then, my decision had already been made. Just decisions. The next morning, I woke up earlier than I normally do. For a second, I caught myself expecting to hear Sophie moving around the kitchen like she always did before leaving for work. Instead, the house was completely quiet. I got up, made myself a cup of coffee, and checked my phone. There were no new calls, no new messages, nothing. It seemed like everyone had finally gotten the message. Later that day, I changed the lock on the front door. Not because I thought Sophie would come back and try to get inside. I did it because it felt like the right way to close that chapter of my life for good. When I stopped and thought about everything that had happened, it was almost hard to believe. A relationship that had lasted more than 2 years was over in the span of about 3 hours. The strangest part was how simple it all felt once it was done. Sometimes one moment shows you everything you need to know about a person. After that, all that's left is making a decision. I made mine, and I never looked back. Bye-bye.